So our next panel, what higher education needs and wants from business and government in the next 5 years? Hopefully, this panel will answer those questions with specific answers that will be takeaways from today's conference. To lead us in that discussion, we've asked Mann back for a second presentation, and she will moderate this panel. And Catherine, thank you very much, and panel members, thank you very much.
Well, thanks very much for continuing on and coming back from the break. Peter here is a hard driving master. He brings us back from the break. So what we're going to do in this session is really have a conversation. Rather than having a set of 15 or 20-minute prepared remarks. And so we've got some excellent, really outstanding presenters or commentators or higher education individuals with us today, and that's why we thought that we would have this conversation. And along the way, we'd really like to solicit questions from you, because this issue about what is it that business, private sector business, public sector government, and higher education, what are the synergies between those three actors? How can they really work together? How can they have that conversation that we heard about from our earlier speaker from MZ? How can they have that conversation armed with the data that he's presented and he's collected? How can they have that conversation? So to start, we're going to have a couple of words from John Fry. And even though I'm not supposed to say anything about them, I think we really have to introduce them just a little bit, because when we have the president of Drexel University here, we ought to recognize that person's new job, or relatively new job, 14th president. But also, I think the thing to point out about this presidency is that it reaches out both globally in terms of having academic and research partnerships in China, Turkey, Israel, Brazil, Chile, India, and South Korea. So it's both global reach as well as local reach. Neighborhood initiatives, the PECO Drexel Education Collaborative supporting local schools, and the Lindy Institute for Urban Innovation, and the Dornscheid Center for Neighborhood Partnerships. That sort of global and also local, I think, is a really fitting way of thinking about the challenges that we have as this synergy between educators, government, and the private sector. So with that, I'll introduce John Fry, and then we'll have our other speakers. I will mention them. I will introduce them after we hear from John.
Thank you. So actually, when I saw the title of the panel, I sort of thought it should be reframed a little bit. So not to be presumptuous, but the title is what higher education needs and wants from business and government. And I thought really the better question for us to ask ourselves today is what higher education can do for and with business and government. And I say this maybe from a particular frame. I just finished my 2-year term as chair of the Greater Philadelphia Chamber of Commerce last Friday. Thankfully, that's done. But in sitting in that role for the last several years, one of the conclusions I had, with maybe a couple of notable exceptions, including my friend Guy Generals from the Community College of Philadelphia, is how actually absent higher ed was from many of the most important deliberations of this large business and civic community with over 5,000 members, and how disappointed it was really not to have the voice of higher ed. If there was a call for resources needed, I'm sure there would have been a line of 200 institutions outside the door, but instead, when there was a call for help and support, I found the sector to be absent for the most part, which makes for an often lonely and incomplete conversation within the business community, because we don't have the kind of partnerships that we need and have to have with all the other educational institutions. And So when I saw the title, it was the usual thing: what higher ed needs and what it wants and what it should get and what it deserves. And in fact, I think we have to think about flipping that on its head and talking more about our civic responsibility as institutions of higher learning, not only to our students who are our primary concern, but also to the various sectors of American society. So in thinking about what higher education can do for and with business and government, I think there are sort of three things in the end that I would submit for your thought. The first, of course, is prepare students for the world of work. And I was president of Liberal Arts College, and I'm a trustee of one right now. So the life of the mind and the centrality of the arts and sciences to everything we do is well established with me. But I do think people today need to have more. They expect their sons and daughters to get a good arts and sciences education. But what about discernment about the future and preparing for the world of work? And I think in many cases, higher ed does not do a great job. We give lip service to some of that. There are some internships. I'm not going to talk about Drexel in any particular way, but I have to tell you, as a cooperative education-based institution, that's sort of all we think about. Yes, we give a good arts and sciences formation, but for the most part, we push our students at the early ages of 19 out into the marketplace for 6 months at a time and let them go out and figure out what works and what doesn't for them. And so I think thinking more about co-op, as we call it, as a potential model for more institutions to engage their students in thinking about what they want to do, for their life's work is something that higher ed may want to take note of. There are very few co-op institutions. It's an elaborate and complex system. We have 1,800 partnerships across the world that help facilitate that. But I feel like we're doing something very, very contemporary. And ironically, next year we're celebrating the 100th anniversary of co-op at Drexel. That's the first thing. The second is serve as true anchor institutions in their local communities. And I think that can be approached and should be approached as a series of really deep and durable partnerships with both government and business. Again, I won't go into details, but you can do that through extension. We have a significant extension presence in one of the most challenged neighborhoods in Philadelphia, Mantua. We do a lot around innovation, taking the research dollars that we've been entrusted with and trying to think about the translational benefit of those investments. We think a lot about inclusion as a part of the way we run our institution, the way we buy goods and services, build buildings, and try to figure out how to make sure that our local community continues to benefit from our presence, and then a whole series of other things which I won't go into given the time. And then the third thing I think we need to do is leverage the resources of the public and private sectors to drive both economic opportunity but also economic development. And we happen to have the benefit of living within a federal promise zone. It was one of the first 5 that President Obama designated back in 2013. That gives us access to all sorts of talent and resources to do work that will benefit others. But this federal promise zone is right next to 2 major burgeoning innovation districts in University City, Schuylkill Yards and U-City Square. Massive amounts of private investment going in to make our economy more competitive. And I think the real call here is to tie that work in the federal promise zone, which is all about inclusion, with the work in Schuylkill Yards and U-City Square, which is all about innovation. And so this innovation inclusion continuum is a real one, not just sort of 2 separate projects that don't really talk to one another. So that's just a little bit of a reframing, at least from my perspective.
So thank you very much. So before we move on, I think there's also another reframing that is important to bring to the table, and it's who are our students and who are we preparing for the quote-unquote world of work. And so for that, what we have here is a short video of a student who is a different student and representing this challenge that we face that as part of the group that we should be addressing as educators and hiring as private sector, and then what role the government should play. We're going to play this video and then we're going to continue on with our other commentators.
we now are happy to have Susanna Mojica, who is a Starbucks partner and first-generation college graduate from Virginia. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. My 5-year-old daughter was really excited that I would get to speak with the state bosses, so. Excuse me. My parents are from Mexico. They immigrated to the United States to give us a better opportunity. I was born in California, and growing up, it wasn't a question if I would be going to college. That was my main goal. The only issue was that once it came time to go to college, there was no money there. My parents didn't have the resources to save for college. So as determined as I was, I said, I'll take loans out. It's okay. So I flew from California to New York, went to Syracuse for a year. And after the first year, I knew that there was no way that I could graduate from there in 4 years and have that large of a loan over my head. How would I live? How would I survive? So I got scared and I became a dropout. It definitely had a negative connotation, one that kind of stuck with me. At that time, I fell in love and got married to my husband, Edgar, of 17 years now. He's in the Coast Guard and we started moving around. I didn't know how to bring my education back in with so many deployments. Would I be studying and we would have to deploy? Would those credits transfer? Would I then waste even more money? After a few years, I had 3 beautiful children, and at that point, they became my priority. From then on, I said, okay, I will save for college, for your college. You won't have these same concerns and worries that I had when it was time for me to go. So they became the priority. I then started working at Starbucks. It was just meant to be a very, very casual part-time job. The College Achievement Program was then announced, and I signed up that very same day. I knew that I get very emotional about it. I knew that this was my opportunity to go back to school. Excuse me. So I started attending the very first session that was offered. Fast forward to May of 2017, I flew to Arizona and walked across that stage and got my diploma. It can be said that it's been my determination, my hard work, that has gotten me to the point where I'm at. But it wasn't just my doing. It was Starbucks and Arizona State that gave me this lucky break, that created this opportunity for me to thrive, that believed in me and looked at it as a social project and not an investment. Through this, I have gained so much confidence. I am currently enrolled at George Mason, working towards a Master's of Public Health. I should be graduating next spring, and I was promoted to Assistant Store Manager, so I should be running my own Starbucks here in a few months. Without this program, I wouldn't be here. So I'm incredibly grateful for the partnership that Dr. Crow and that Dr. Schultz came up with. That investment in us resonates at the store level. I have a few partners. We refer to ourselves as partners at Starbucks. I have a few partners at my store that are participating in the program, and it's just created such a different environment in our stores and in the confidence of our fellow partners. Thank you so much for letting me share my story with you.
So when I saw that video, the thing that struck me the most was she called herself a social project, not an investment. And I had to say, and I looked at it and I said, what? That was the strangest sentence to me, because she's an investment. She's an investment and not a social project. And thinking about the partnership between education, educational institutions, private sector, and the government, it is all about investment in human capital, investment in resources. And, she's not the 16-year-old, right? We've got the demographic issues that we need to be considering both as businesses and as educational institutions. Here's somebody who has moved around a lot. How is education mobile? Is it mobile? Is it not mobile? It should be mobile. Here's somebody who's older, but you can't kind of toss them out because, as I said in my diagram earlier this morning, those are the people who are paying into pensions and health care. You can't sort of say, well, we're going to ignore all the middle-aged people and kind of get it right for the young people. No, we can't do that. We got to get it right for a whole set of generations. So we have some people who are getting it right now. We've got James O'Brien, who is Senior Vice President of University Affairs and Chief of Staff to President Michael Crow of Arizona State University. And we have Ann Kirschner, who's President of Common International, who's a consultancy in media, culture, and technology and education, and university professor at the City University of New York. Also an author and a pioneer in e-learning. So I'd like to talk to Ann first and talk about what are the forces shaping the future of work, because here we have somebody who's kind of been in the workforce, so to speak, for a long time, but is still in the process of evolving towards that future of work.
And by the way, she makes me cry a little bit too.
Use your microphone.
And the truth of the matter is,
You can push it, yeah.
how's that? I was just saying she makes me cry when I watch that video. And there's more like her than there are the sort of 18 to 24-year-olds whom we think, the non-traditional student has become the traditional student. And I think that's really an important thing for us to understand. So I'm actually teaching a course on the future of work now at CUNY, and started out, I was thinking about this when you were talking, it started out as a course on the future of higher ed, and then I realized that was the wrong lens to look at this question through, because as much as I love colleges and universities, at the end of the day, the question isn't what happens just to these institutions we revere and love. The question is what happens to the people who go to these universities, like that wonderful woman. So, the changes that are coming are deep and serious. One of the things we've been looking at in this course is when you look back in history at other technological disruptions, industrial revolution, etc. If you take the long view, everything is okay in the end. More jobs are created than lost. The problem is that can take 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, with a tremendous amount of social unrest and unemployment in the meantime. So while the news may be good in the end, the fact of the matter is that there's a tremendous amount of change coming. How big could it be depends on whether you read McKinsey or the Shift report or Deloitte, or pick your poison, anywhere from 40 to 60%. Some people believe the number of jobs that we will lose. The number one job in the United States, in 29 states, is truck driver. The number one job. Now, some sort of autonomous vehicles are coming at us. I was going to say coming at us like a freight train, but I guess that wouldn't be a good way to describe it. But it's not only those kinds of jobs. It's doctors, radiologists, accountants, HR professionals. Lots of corners of work are going to be squeezed, and we don't even know what those new jobs are going to be. I mean, did we know what a data scientist was 10 years ago? I don't think so. So how do you educate when you don't know what the jobs are going to be? And higher education and business are joined at the hip here. You could say that the future of work is the future of education. One of the concerns I have is that this is going to be the hardest transition higher education has ever had to make for a couple of reasons. How do we learn how to create these agile, self-directed learners who will have the sort of nimbleness that we were talking about this morning, the chameleons, to use that expression, to gain new learning. When we in higher education think of education as front-loaded, you go for 4 years and it's going to fuel your career. That is an anachronistic concept. Learning has to become much more continuous over your lifetime. We think in terms of majors, but the fact of the matter is work is intrinsically interdisciplinary. We think about creating students as individual performers, but work is increasingly collaborative and teamwork oriented. We know that the world of work is changing rapidly, and yet we inhabit a world where changing curriculum is the work of years or sometimes decades. So sometimes we think business, reacts too quickly to quarterly pressures, but the fact of the matter is we move at a glacial speed. And perhaps the thing that I worry about most, although clearly it's not an issue at Drexel and it's not an issue at Arizona State, but it is at lots of other places, which is the resistance to the career focus, that somehow that is anti-intellectual, that somehow, we are putting too much emphasis on careers, whereas every survey you read, it's obvious that this is the #1 concern of students. So I think the transition is going to be a little bit of a painful one, but everything we know about the future of work is that the changes, some of which we already see around us, are going to be astonishingly comprehensive in how they reach deeply into every sector, not only in the United States, but globally.
So Jim, you're in the thick of it, and how are you dealing with these both this combination of the new student and the rapid pace of change? How are you approaching it?
I think the primary approach, first, there's a methodological approach at the university, and that is with rapid change. There's a need for the university to behave differently than perhaps has behaved in the past, and that's challenging because universities are. There's an existing business model, there's an existing frame of reference, there's an existing culture that permeates the academy across the country, that is in some ways greater than the institutions themselves. And so the methodology in responding to change, I think, particularly the speed of change, is first this need to be adaptable at the institution. And I know that sounds maybe trite in some respects, but adaptable means that you think about everything differently. That could mean the academic calendar. Now, that may not seem like a big thing to people in industry, the idea of changing a calendar, but in the academy, the notion of when the school year begins and when it ends, these things take on a sort of a mystique. And so adaptability means that you look at the academic calendar and you change it if you need to change it to meet the needs of learners. That means that you look at technology and you incorporate technology and you integrate technology into the learning environment, whether it's online or whether it's on campus, because technology allows you to scale. It allows you to reduce costs. It allows you actually to teach some people better than they've been taught before. So adaptability means that you look at all things and there's nothing that's really held sacred. Second, and I think responding to the rapid speed of change, is that the university has got to change its own sense of speed. There is a notion that everything in the university works on a semester. So that if we're going to plan or do something, we'll measure the amount of time that it takes by the semester. Like, well, at the end of this semester, or maybe next semester. The world no longer works that way. And so for a university to be engaged with a business, to meet the needs of business, the university is going to need to work at a much higher clock speed, as President Crow would say, than it's ever worked before. And we have to disassociate the semester from the real world and from meeting the needs of business, because business, when Starbucks determines that it needs online education to meet the needs of its employees, it doesn't want to wait 3 semesters for that. It wants to figure it out as soon as possible. And that means the university has to then adjust the speed with which it works. And then there is an element in all of this, and words like this around higher education are often fraught with peril. There's a need to be more efficient in the way we do things. And efficiency in higher education means scaling. We have got to be able to scale higher education to meet the rate of change. Because if we don't scale in this country, 350 million people, 400 million people, we are going to leave so many people behind that it's unbelievable. The current higher education infrastructure of this country is insufficient to meet the needs of the economy that is coming, the economy that's here, the needs of business. And so efficiency means that we must learn how to scale higher education, and we have got to stop believing that the only way to instruct students is with a teacher in front of 20 students in a classroom, because if we insist on doing that, then we are leaving more and more people out at the very time in this country when it's becoming more and more diverse and when it has a greater and greater need for more instruction, more higher education, more learning. So I think to some extent the answer of how the institution and how ASU, and I know Drexel has done, really just a tremendous job. President Crow just thinks, very highly of what President Fry has done here and his work in Philadelphia and with the university. To meet change, it requires changing the institution itself. And it's got to start there because there's no way for the traditional university, the traditional pathways, the traditional methodologies to adapt to what's coming.
So let me develop that a little bit further, John. How do you reconcile this need for scale in order to generate efficiency with what we've already heard is the importance, even in a distance learning sense, to have local specificities? We've heard that on the data presentation, and then even in the legal presentation, and your co-ops are pretty much, there are not 100 students showing up at the one job. So how is the higher educational business model going to, as I say, reconcile this need for scale for efficiency with this need for localness and individual experiences that are part of designing a program that works for individuals and for individual regions?
Yeah, it's a complex thing. So what we've done, not to just go into the organizational mechanics, we've set up a separate online learning company, which is basically a distribution and marketing company. In fact, my colleague Susan Aldridge is here, who runs that. And what she does is work with her primary customers, who are her deans, and they basically craft programs that at the master's and bachelor's level that they think will be sort of responsive to the question of scale. There are a lot of people out here who want to pursue potentially a Drexel degree, but they're not going to be able to come to University City and do that every day because they have busy lives, they're working, they're raising families, they have all sorts of logistical challenges. And so, the ability to scale has been important to our success. I think we serve over 5,000 students now.
Over 7.
7, okay, that's better news. But then again, we haven't been able to pull off what Jim and Michael and their colleagues at ASU have done, which is many, many more times that. In fact, interestingly enough, we're involved in a partnership where we're learning from them and they're learning from us in a number of these different areas. So I feel like we can, because of this infrastructure, really start to scale very nicely. Then the question is, how do you reconcile that with the sort of individual needs of learners, and what can we do within the context, particularly of the online space, to address that. And I won't go into details, but I think there's a lot now that we can do with advising that we couldn't have done before, but for the help of a whole bunch of other resources that have been sort of created locally, and basically trying to make sure that while we're scaling, we can deliver as much of a personalized experience as possible. And I think that has been a bit of a challenge for us. I think the retention of our students in some of those programs hasn't been what it needs to be, because while we've successfully enrolled them, we haven't always figured out how to retain them as well. And there are a number of different things that Susan is probably far better qualified to respond to than I am. So I think we recognize the issue and are working now towards how do you make this as personalized personalized an experience as possible? And also, how do you do some other things that are uniquely Drexel? How do we, for example, incorporate some sort of a work component into an online program? And so we're doing a lot more on the hybrid side. For our undergraduate students, for example, or graduate students who are studying in University City and face-to-face programs, they now have access to all the online resources. And so they can sort of tailor their program so they can move around a little more. So we're trying to give people as much choice as we can. And I think it goes back to your comment, Jim, about the fact that the institutional structures tend to work against all of that. We're not flexible. We tend to be, pretty hierarchical and sort of vertically, driven institutions instead of ones that are comfortable working across horizontal space and connecting the various parts. And so a lot of what we struggle with is just that, how to clear out some of that bureaucracy in order to allow us to make this as personalized and set of experiences as we can.
So, Anne, you also, have done quite a bit of work in the e-learning space, a company, Fathom, with Columbia London School of Economics. So how would you respond to this issue of how to both get the scale benefits, but also make sure that the local needs are also met? It's not just like students have local needs,
Right.
It's localities have local needs. And so how does that map? How does that work?
Well, it is complex, and by the way, the chairman of my board when I was running Fathom, which was a for-profit company that Columbia University was the principal investor in, was Michael Crow. So that was where we first. Yeah. Well, I'm not sure that's the word I would use, but it was a long-standing relationship. This question of scale is so interesting because the culture of higher education is antithetical to scale. We think of scale, we think of exclusivity as equaling quality in higher education. That's sort of been the historical thing. You think about the cursed U.S. News and World Reports, it likes to tell you how many people applied and how few got in, as if somehow that's the right measure. And, one of the things when Michael Crow first became president at Arizona State, one of the things he did was really turn that formulation on its head and say, judge us by how many we include, not by how many we exclude, which I think was the single most revolutionary formulation a university president had ever made. Look, it's a hard question, but when you think about a regional economy, even though you may be dealing with relatively small numbers, you're still going to find some scale in there. And the fact of the matter is, in the complexity of an educational experience, some parts will scale better than others, and some parts will, and different learners will succeed in different kinds of formats. So you may need a one-on-one sort of experience for some, whereas online learning may work better for other learners. But I do think that the issue we've been hitting on about experiential learning, about apprenticeships, about internships, is absolutely critical, again, when you think of the student we saw in the video, and you think about first-generation, low-income students who don't have parental models or social models around them of lots of different kinds of jobs to have. We have to give them that sort of grounding in order for them to have the inspiration to think about, lots of different kind of jobs. If I can just tell you one anecdote, when I became head of Macaulay College at CUNY, I had spent a lot of time, most of my career was in private sector, and a lot of it was in sports. So I thought to myself, I'm going to do a survey of where the students want to get internships. And I had spent 5 years at the National Football League, and I had friends at MLB, and I had friends in hockey, and I had all this, whatever. So I listed all the different kinds of places you could potentially get an internship. None of the Honors College students, and I'm talking none, wanted to work in sports. Well, why do you think that is? I mean, did none of them like sports? No, it's because they were hard-driving, first-generation, mostly immigrant students who thought that if it was too much fun it might not be serious and their parents might not like it. So, so bring on financial services and bring on consulting and bring on med school. They all want to go to med school, but no sports. So I never brought it up again. That was that.
So, Jim, it sounds like ASU is really the leader of the pack here. So in terms of dealing with this challenge of scale and yet local needs, both of the students and of the region. So how have you rolled out this challenge?
Well, I think first, if you took online, there are challenges, but I think we're having great success. Technology can be your friend there. The nature of the technology has actually helped some people learn better than classroom instruction. And second, we've used student coaching. So we have a whole cadre of student coaches, so everybody's assigned a student coach. And in fact, the data, we talk about data, the data on online learners is unbelievable that an instructor has available. Every keystroke, whether the student is attending class or not attending class, whether they're posting on boards. So there's tremendous analytics that can be used to try to evaluate the strengths and weaknesses of the student, and then through student coaches help them. On campus, technology is also our friend. We've tried to redo the instruction of math. So Susanna, who spoke in the video earlier, had been a college dropout. Now, she had dropped out because of student debt, but one of the greatest inhibitors to college degree attainment is math. And so we have whole collections of people in this country who have not finished a bachelor's degree because they couldn't pass college algebra. And it seems like a crazy system we have where we turn people into dropouts because they couldn't learn college algebra. And what we've tried to adopt is, I guess, an attitude, a view at ASU that the students who are not succeeding in college algebra aren't succeeding because they're dumb or they can't do it. It's because we're failing them. If students aren't passing college algebra, it's nobody's fault except the institutions. And so somehow or another, we've got to come around to that fact and accept that failure of students to pass college algebra is the failure of the institution. And so we've tried to take technology and we've built classes now using adaptive learning techniques, essentially, where you have about 100 students in a classroom with a professor and a variety of teaching assistants, and it allows the students to proceed at their own pace. I mean, historically, in teaching math, we've assumed everybody has to proceed at exactly the same rate. And when you do that, guess what happens? A lot of people get left behind. If you allow students to proceed at their own pace, and you help them proceed at their own pace, and you coach them to proceed at their own pace, and they're not allowed to advance until they demonstrate mastery of each unit one at a time, you can help people move through college algebra, we found, more successfully than just jamming into these classrooms of 20 students and everybody proceeds at the same rate and either fail or pass. We've allowed people to pass college algebra with a 70% rate. You know what that means? When you move to college algebra 2, you don't know 30% of the material. 30% of the material out of the gate you don't have available to apply to your next math session. So in terms of success of students at scale, it means rethinking the way at the institution that we're doing things, and it doesn't always involve technology, but it could. One other element of this then is this kind of special responsibility that we think, and clearly Drexel thinks, that institutions have to serve the different types of learners that are available, to serve college dropouts like Susanna, to work with the local business community, to assist in economic development and find ways to find ways to help individuals be successful learners regardless of their background or wherever they may be. And so it's a tremendous challenge to scale at that level, but we're reaching out with non-degree courses and certificates and trying to work with employers on continuing education in the workplace. So I think we don't have this figured out. I don't think anybody has this figured out, but I think more than anything, it means a willingness to be open to the particular nature of the problems that we're facing, and then an openness to crafting new and different types of solutions to those problems.
Could I add one thing to that? One of the ways we're trying to sort of get local is to work with different companies in the region. And I have my Dean of North Business School, Paul Jensen's here with his colleague Raj Surrey, and they've developed basically a sort of set of opportunities for us to partner with different companies on the broad issue of talent. And so typically that's been expressed through co-ops. You send 25 co-ops to Vanguard, and that was sort of our Vanguard strategy. Instead of actually sitting with Vanguard and saying, what are your pain points? What can we do to help you? And all of a sudden now we're offering degree programs at Vanguard, which include an international travel component. We're basically working with them on a sort of complex series of business problems that they have, using our students and our faculty as their consultants. And we've again tried to flip, the view that this is really about what's ailing these companies and what the challenges are and what the opportunities are, and how does our university step into that and serve?
So I'm glad you brought it over to talking about the business side of things. I mean, it's I sort of feel like bring the horse to water, but whatever, the trough is dry. So the issue is how do you get business to be a partner with you? We heard again the data this morning sort of being that dispassionate provider of entree for conversation. Is the data say this? That helps us have a common foundation for discussion. But how do you bring, and you were talking about, Anne, you were talking about the survey, surveying the students about what internships they might want. But, we still have to, there's still the last mile or whatever, which is what does the business want and how do we engage, or how does the education community engage with the business? Is it the responsibility of business to go to the school and say, we would really like X, Y, and Z? Is it the responsibility of the school to say, I would like to work with you, and how can we do this? How does this work?
All of the above. I like what John said about the pain point. I think that's really, really important. But a regular dialogue between higher education and business is absolutely essential. What's your 3-year horizon for hiring? Where do you see big growth opportunities? What are you struggling with? We began a conversation with, we being CUNY in this case, the City University of New York, 500,000 students in the City University of New York. About half are full-time matriculating students, and the other half are part-time students. Most of them are working, and most of them are low income. Verizon approached us in the beginning of a conversation about diversity in tech. Not only were they not able to get the people they needed to hire, but underrepresented minorities and women in particular were missing in their talent pool. And we developed a program together with Cornell Tech that now is in its 3rd year, called Whitney, Women in Technology in New York, with a very specific pain point to address, which is that the representation of women in computer science is minuscule, although women represent the majority of college students. And they're actually well represented in the science and the engineering and mathematics, the SEM of STEM, but not in tech. And that's where the jobs are. So how are you going to increase the participation of women in computer science? Eventually it became a group of companies, Verizon, Accenture, IBM, Citi, a host of others, that became the backers for Whitney, and we took a multi-pronged approach through curriculum and communications and a focus on careers, where the companies supplied, they gave us that horizon for where the jobs in tech were, what areas specifically they wanted to fill. They helped us develop curriculum, and importantly, back to this question of internships, we had not only internships, but what we called winternships, because most of the summer interns became hired out of a January pool that we provided. So It's been a wonderfully successful program, and I can tell you a little bit about what I think the key factors of its success were, as well as some of the obstacles. Everything begins with leadership. Everything, I mean, institutions make deals, sort of, but really it's people who make deals. And so at these companies and at these higher education institutions, we had leadership who really thought this question of gender diversity in tech was really important. Government got into the act as well because we discovered that we had an instructional capacity gap at CUNY. I could be out there stirring the pot trying to get more women into computer science, but we didn't have enough faculty to teach the classes. And so through a combination of hiring new faculty with funds from New York City government, which has been quite a leader in what they call the tech talent pipeline, online learning, and reaching out to practitioners in New York for them to come and teach these courses in their places of business, we were able to address that. So the resources and the expertise of the companies were essential. The leadership was essential. That sort of entrepreneurial, can-do, non-semester oriented attitude was really essential. But there are a lot of obstacles to overcome. We don't have a culture of innovation in most universities. In fact, we have sort of antibodies to change. That sort of swarm over you and try to kill anything that is new. And a tremendous amount of faculty resistance. Faculty don't want to be taught what to teach. We're teaching C++. Don't tell me to teach Python. What's Python? Who's going to care about Python 5 years from now? Which is a conversation I've actually had with computer science faculty. Politics, if you know anything about New York City, you know that we have a governor and a mayor who hate each other's guts. Don't tell them I said so, but that's pretty obvious. And then the flip side of leadership is when leadership changes, and you have to sort of keep a program going, despite the fact that the faces at the top have changed. But Whitney has navigated all of those, and I think is really a national model for how to build a public-private partnership, for how to get universities and businesses working together, and how to define a specific pain point and then go out and solve it.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, and I guess reiterate, this idea of leadership and corporate leadership is really important. And so if I were to pick something from the corporate world, as we try to work with corporations, there's a tendency, it seems to me, of corporate executives to devolve the notion of talent management into the organization. It's something that they'll acknowledge is important, but given the day-to-day sales cycle, or given the marketing, or given capitalization of the company, the talent management then begins to be devolved lower in the organization. When that happens, we find at the university it's harder and harder to engage the corporate enterprise and engage it again at scale and with speed. If it's just left to the HR manager, we don't make as much progress as quickly as we could if there's a CEO to CEO relationship. So what we've tried to do with the partnerships we have, Starbucks, Adidas, the Mayo Clinic, is we try to ensure that President Crow is intimately engaged in those relationships to send the signal that there's an institutional commitment from the university to the corporation, and to signal that there's an expectation there'll be an institutional level commitment back. Otherwise, it becomes very transactional. We feel like a vendor after a while, and we're not interested in relationships with corporations where we're a vendor. We're interested in relationships where we can really get something done and make a difference and have an impact, and we don't do very well when we're treated like a vendor or when we behave like a vendor.
Could I just throw one out, and because I'm throwing the ball down that way to you, David. So I had a chart this morning that had frontier firms and had everybody else. A lot of the relationship that we're talking about here is with large companies. And so I'm wondering, there's another component of scale here, which is how does all of this sort of good relationships between between higher ed and businesses doesn't have any sort of touch point for smaller firms. And especially if we think about some of the challenges that are being put forward that, again, we heard about this morning, about manufacturing and the skills, the $17 worker with the pretzels. So that's a small company. It's got a small workforce. It's got some skill needs, some specific skill needs. So is that sort of something we're going to have to hope for, like trickle-down works? Or is there another local initiatives that can help try to drive that benefits of all these relationships at a small scale level, small size firm?
So this may just be an ancillary benefit of having a co-op program, but our students basically are leading us to these places. So our students don't just want to, go do a co-op at a large company. They also want to be in startups, and they want to be in mid-sized companies who are largely a middle market economy here in Philadelphia. And so the demand for those types of specific experiences has led us to begin to place students all throughout that sort of ecosystem of startups and small companies and medium-sized companies. And then what we've tried to do is follow our students. So if they're having a good experience, we get to know the company. And the next thing you know, we're having a conversation like with Vanguard, but with a startup. The other thing we've done that I think has helped the sort of ethos of the university around this is started a school of entrepreneurship, which I won't go into the details of that, but I think what's important about that is now we have a major component of the institution where we see many of our major colleges and schools now partnering on joint degree programs because our students increasingly want to learn about and be exposed to entrepreneurship. Now, they may want to be a biomedical engineer, but they'd like to also know how to start their own business and how to survive starting your own business. And so I think in our conversation now increasingly is how do we create entrepreneurial opportunities for our students as well, and this school, the close school, basically facilitates that. But the answer to your question is that we're following our students to where they want to go.
Great. I mean, that's because I think that is a very key issue, and I did some work with the Boston Fed's New England Institute, Public Policy Institute, and NEPI. And one of the things that they found was that the small manufacturing firms in central Massachusetts found they all needed a set of skilled workers, but they only needed like 2 of them. And so sort of this galvanizing, this enormous operation in say the University of Massachusetts for 2 jobs at a manufacturing firm was like a disconnect there that was leaving them unfilled. So there's a bigger question on this issue that Jim, you were particularly interested in thinking about, which is how does any of this fit into the goals of the U.S. government, particularly with regard to competitiveness. This is kind of a big piece of the landscape out there right now.
Well, I think certainly I don't know if we'd have much debate about this, but the competitiveness of the United States depends as much on education and higher education as anything else. The ability of our people to be adaptable, to be responsive, the ability of our corporations and business enterprises to have access to the talent they need in a rapidly changing environment. I mean, it just seems to me it's almost unquestionable that talent and the ability of this country to produce talent at scale is the most important thing that we could do in terms of international competitiveness. The one thing the government, I think, could do to help us in that regard is, and I think President Obama began this process, and the states have followed suit, the governors, and that is set attainment goals for post-secondary education. And there's, I think, a movement in that direction, but we have a long way to go in this country, having set the goals to yet really begin to achieve them. And so we're going to have to, I think, be clear as a country that this is important to us and have goals on which we agree and on which we're working together to attain and measure those goals and be able to demonstrate that this country can remain competitive in the world out there and through higher education.
So I want to go to the audience, but I want to finish up just a moment here because this notion of agreed goals, again, sort of runs a little bit up against the uniqueness of regions, and that where is there a common foundation of these are the goals that are good for everybody versus these are the things that we need to have done for individual regions. And when we think again about goals, I wanted to bring in this question about credentialing. And how does credentialing fit in with these other sort of higher educations? It's sort of not a semester thing, it's not a 4-year thing, maybe it's not a 2-year thing. And then how do these credentialings fit in? Is it an avenue towards getting to common?
And maybe it's not a diploma.
Right.
I guess that's.
What do you think?
I think an undergraduate degree has been a useful, blunt instrument for companies to use to signal the potential of an applicant. It was a convenience. And that has been the great gift to higher education, which higher education earned, right? But the days of those kind of blunt instruments are numbered. And I think we have to support the value of the undergraduate diploma in new ways. And we have to make room for other kinds of certifications that are shorter, more flexible, less expensive, more targeted, and whether they stack up to a full diploma is, I think, an open question. And I would put in a plug here, actually, for 2 books that really have, I think, spurred a lot of discussion on this. One is Joseph Owen's book, which is called Robot Proof: Higher Education in the Age of AI, or something like that, which is quite eloquent about the kinds of skills that higher education should be thinking about. And the other is Ryan Craig's new book, which is called A New You, which talks about a lot of the different forms of credentials that are coming. And it's way beyond MOOCs, and it's way beyond boot camps, although I think both of those are harbingers of the sort of things to come. But there's a lot of companies that have started taking undergraduate degree required off their job descriptions. And that, to me, is the canary in the coal mine for higher education, because if we lose your confidence as business leaders that we are giving you this sort of well-rounded, potential great employees that you need, then I think we've lost our golden ticket. So I don't think the diploma is dead, but I think the market share that it represents in post-secondary education is going to change under pressure from new competitive entrants. And I look to higher education leaders like the ones represented from these 2 astonishing institutions to help figure out how to support the diploma, the value of the diploma going forward.
So do we have some time for questions? Do we have any questions? Otherwise, we can just continue on. So I'm gonna pass over Kathleen because she already asked one. I'm behind Kathleen. I'll get back to Kathleen.
Hi, thank you for your comments.
Could you introduce yourself, please?
I'm Doug Palmer. I'm the provost at Walsh University in North Canton, Ohio. So very Rust Belt kind of community, and everything that you talked about are things that at times we have attempted in various degrees on our campus. And yet, as you said, talked about resistance and the antibodies, I think I'm still getting over the wounds inflicted from an attempt at a calendar change. So what are some of the change management strategies that you would employ to address some of that resistance that you brought up?
Grow a very thick skin is one. And develop a coalition of the willing, as opposed to going, full frontal to those who want to see innovation die.
I would try to give it a mission frame. So one of the great things that our founder did for us, other than founding the Institute 125 years ago, was the quote, "The world is going to change, and we must change with it." And so when we go through these discussions about major changes, new initiatives, of which we've had a number, I always try to start at the beginning and say, okay, now why would this not be inconsistent with the way in which our founder thought about this institution, located it in a very unorthodox place in the middle of basically a gigantic industrial zone back 125 years ago, because he wanted to educate first-generation blue-collar kids, and he wanted to admit women as well as men and people from all races and creeds, and tie back to the mission of the institution the change that we're contemplating. And I think in many cases, people see that idea of the institution having to evolve, or it's not going to remain true to itself. And so the big frame first, and then I agree with Ann, I think then you start some projects, and you get some dirt under your fingernails, and you get some successes, hopefully, and you begin to prove the point and bring the skeptics along. But I think rather than just sort of plunging into it, put some context around it.
Good question in the back.
I'm not using Philadelphia, I want to take Drexel.
Introduce yourself, please introduce yourself. Wait for the mic, thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm Stan Schroeder, a member of the GIC and the chairman of the board of the African Caribbean Business Council, Greater Philadelphia. I want to thank Drexel and, of course, Community College of Philadelphia, what they're doing in our community, because I see, you've only mentioned it, struck around it, but I see we're heading toward university without walls, and the bricks and mortar that you have built will not be able to sustain this stuff going forward. I'm just thinking about Temple trying to build a stadium in the middle of the city, and everybody is against it, So how do you look at the future of education in the context of your work in the community, which is excellent, and I think that's where we need to be ultimately. That's the one question. The second thing is, when I went to college, higher education was a great leveler in our society, and I think due to price and many other things, we're intensifying this discussion around class and race in the university itself, because most people can't afford to get there by virtue of the example of the young lady we talked about. So we're going to have this massive unemployed groupings of people, both class and race, that are looking at those elite persons that are able to go to institutions, creating a greater fissure in our society than we already have. So you speak to those?
Well, I think the concern about the responsiveness of universities to the demographics that we serve, the changing population of the country, and the socioeconomic stratification of the country. So one of the things we try to measure at ASU is that we have 13,000 students in our freshman class. So just the freshman class is 13,000. In that freshman class, for the first time this year, greater than 50% of those students are non-white. So there's an increasing diversity in our class. But we're also then, what we like to do is look at the class in terms of the socioeconomic distribution. What percentage of students come from households of less than $20,000 a year in annual income? What percentage of the class come from a household less than $40,000? And so what we're trying to do is ensure that our freshman class mirrors the socioeconomic distribution of the state of Arizona. So we think it's fair and reasonable that we be held accountable for that our student body reflect the population of the state. And so, I was just looking at the figures. We had 1,400 of our freshmen were from households of less than $20,000 a year of income. Another 1,400 students were from households of less than $40,000 a year of income, and so on. So if you look at the distribution of our freshman class, it mirrors the state. Now, how do we do that? That requires a change in the business model. That requires, we invest $400 million of university resources every year in our own internal financial aid program. Because what we have to do is, students who come from families of less than $20,000, they can't afford to pay tuition. And if they're going to attend the institution, again, this kind of comes back to our responsibility. It's our responsibility in running the institution to ensure that they can attend. So then we have to build a business model, we have to muster resources, we have to dedicate those resources to ensure that those students can attend the institution. So there's no easy answer except, I think, to say that yes, we bear that responsibility at the university. It's probably imperfect at this point in time, but we've made, I think, tremendous progress. And if we focus on it, if we accept it as a responsibility, I'm confident that we can ensure that access to higher education is equally distributed across our society. There's just more work to do.
I'm afraid I'm going to pour fuel on the fire, only because survey after survey is showing eroding public confidence in higher education. And I think we have to use that. We who care about higher ed have to use that to say that the status quo cannot hold. A situation where 59% of students don't graduate, and of the ones who do graduate, and that's 6 years, by the way, not 4 years, so we've moved the goalposts. And then of the ones who graduate, 40% of them are underemployed, meaning they're employed in jobs that are not commensurate with a college education. And if you start out underemployed in that first job, the chances that you will be underemployed 5 years or even 10 years out, this is Strata statistics from a recent wonderful study. So we got a lot of work to do, but the wolf is at the door, and never waste a crisis. I think this is a great turning point for higher education.
Question here. I was going for this lady here.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Karen Holbrook. I'm from the University of South Florida. So I'm 17, former president of Ohio State University. This is a very interesting conversation. I've enjoyed it very much. It's one that's been taking place since the 1800s. You certainly know that when the land-grant universities were established by President Lincoln, they were established so that the so-called people who could toil, who were not in the patrician society and could build the young nation and economic competitiveness. We're back to the same thing, and as Ann has just said, the lack of confidence, or I guess it was you, Ann, anyway, you've all said that, lack of confidence in higher education has really caused a lot of change in Florida. And so I'm not asking a question, but I'm going to make a comment that I think is relevant to what we've been talking about. The state of Florida has a state university system of higher education, and it's run by a board of governors. The board of governors put in place a number of years ago two things. One was preeminence for universities, and what does that mean? It means more money. And the performance-based metrics. What does that mean? It means more money. People pay attention when it means more money, but what they've really done is a very good thing, and I'm not going to go to the preeminence one, but I'll go to the performance-based metrics, and design 10 metrics for every university to be evaluated every single year on a point-based system, and the number of points they accumulate gives them a certain amount added to their budget. But what they're all related to is workforce. They are basically the measures are graduation rates, 4-year, 6-year rate, but students that graduate without extra credits, meaning that it doesn't cost them more to go to school, so costs are there. What their salary is at the end of the year. And what they are doing in what are called the strategic areas of strategic emphasis. So it's based on what are the jobs in Florida and what are the students in those, how many of the students are graduating in those disciplines that are largely STEM, IT, health-related professions, and so forth. But the whole criteria is really based on student success. Everything is related to the students that come out and are gainfully employed and come out within the right period of time. So I think it's at first we thought, it's really antithetical to an education per se. It's now becoming a vocational school or a technical school. But in the end, it's really making a difference for the students, and it's making a difference for the institutions.
Another question, just pass the mic, we'll be back to the gentleman. We have time for this question and
Just one or two more questions.
Very quickly, Guy General's president of community college. I would like to assert community colleges into this conversation and remind everyone that at least half of all the undergraduates in the country are coming out of community or in community colleges, and I think that has to be part of the conversation. Relative to the success of students, or scaling of students, I'd also like to throw into the mix that somewhere between 55 and 60% of students coming out of high schools are placing into remediation. So it's not just algebra. I don't think those students are dumb. I think we have to talk about educational equality, or the lack thereof, in this country in order to talk about scaling up potential students who will come through these schools. And then finally, community colleges, and many of the more progressive colleges colleges are moving away from the traditional Charles Eliot model of the deficit approach towards education and looking at growth models. Students' abilities are not necessarily predicted by how they test on a particular test score, a discrete number at any particular time, and yet we were making determinations relative to cost and time and education on the basis of that. So a reformation of the entire system really needs to take place relative to how we allow students into the higher ed system. And then finally, I just want to say that we need to look at, we haven't talked about the high schools, we do need to think of our educational superstructure, if you will, in terms of K-16. I know community colleges have, tried to get away from that because we didn't want to be associated with adult ed and all of that, but we really need to create an alignment between the high schools and the colleges that's much more substantial, more than the one-offs. There are a lot of one-offs, a lot of programs. When I'm talking about teacher training, I'm talking about how we test students. That student that takes algebra in their junior and senior year and does quite well, A's and B's, and then comes to the college and tests into remediation. There's something broken and it has nothing to do with that student. So I don't know if there's a question. I'm looking for just a reaction.
Yes.
In my vocabulary, higher ed is anything after high school. I gave up long ago on thinking of higher ed as some sort of 4-year degree. It's anything after high school, but you're absolutely right. Linking back to the high school is very important. John, I think you have.
Yeah, Guy, I couldn't agree more. In fact, we've redefined our talent pipeline from junior, seniors in high school to K through that point. And we actually have an articulated set of programs, mostly in this promise zone, which you know about, where we're starting to work with 2-year-olds in childcare centers and daycare centers, not because we think they're all coming to Drexel, but because we think that frame actually is a good one for us to sort of practice in. And maybe, yes, we'll get some of those kids too, we hope. But in the meantime, the work that we're doing is around a long continuum of talent.
And I would just say, from ASU's perspective, everything you said is exactly right on. And we have 10,000 transfer students in addition to their 13,000 first-time, full-time freshmen. And so our community college partners, they're invaluable to the education system in Arizona and elsewhere. So we, as a university, again, have to take responsibility for working with our community college partners and making that easier, making that better, and making it as fluid as possible for those students.
One last question. Could I just say, CUNY's community college program, which is called the ASAP program, has proven that by providing students with kind of a surround sound of everything from better advising to Metro cards to get around the New York City subways, they've doubled the graduation rates in CUNY and community colleges. So it's a very promising model.
Last question. Right here. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you to the whole panel. I think this was a fantastic
Could you
discussion.
introduce yourself, please?
Absolutely. My name is Linda Joy Harris. I am the Director of Strategy at the Philadelphia International Airport, so I'm not in higher ed. A lot of times what we do, particularly as we look for new talent and we're trying to put more junior members into projects, we do look for agility. We look for, being self-starters, being outcome-driven, and really you have to be able to either lead or work with a team. Can you speak to it all, how you're transitioning as universities and colleges to really make sure that your students have these competencies? We know they can take tests, we know they can learn, but these are the types of things that we're looking for in terms of great employees and great team members.
Pedagogy still is the province of the individual faculty member. And if I could push another book on you, I would tell you to read Kathy Davidson's book on higher education, the title of which I can't remember at the moment. But it talks about active pedagogy and getting students involved in collaborative, teamwork driven projects. The question is how you take the great work done by an individual faculty member and scale it, to use that word again, to become more of an ethos for the whole university. And I have to say, I don't have a single answer for that. I once suggested in a university meeting that we make online learning or evidence of innovation and learning part of the tenure process, and there was total silence in the room. I practically got thrown out on a rail. So I don't know how you make that part of an institutional culture other than rewarding great faculty members and figuring out some incentives for department chairs. That's a tough one.
I think the reason we're so committed to co-ops is we actually think many of those teachers are in places like the Philadelphia airport, and that as a bunch of 19-year-olds, when they go out into the workplace, they'll go on with what they've learned in the classroom. But that process of discerning who you are in up to 3 different contexts for long periods of time where you're getting paid and you're getting evaluated, eventually they're going to form those habits because they know that those habits are going to be rewarded with, sort of success and more opportunity. But we have tens of thousands of teachers out there for our students right now because they're working in all sorts of places where people are telling them, this is how you do it, and they're modeling those behaviors, and they're giving them encouragement, they're giving them constructive criticism. And I think after those kind of opportunities are done, those kids have grown up a little more and know a little more about themselves, and hopefully are as well prepared as they need to be.
Great, well, thank you very much. Let's give our panelists a great We've run over a little bit, but I think, judging from the questions, that this was a very fruitful discussion, and I'm sure we'll continue it over a quick lunch.
Yes, we will. Thank you very much to our panel. I do have 1 or 2 announcements, but hold tight, panelists, for just a second, because you may want to listen for a second. So I do want to thank Ann in particular, because I know she's doing some work on, a good deal of work on the impact of artificial intelligence on higher education, as is my firm. And I do also recommend the book she cited, Jill Noon's book on that topic, What About Proof. He's the president of Northeastern University, also running a fantastic co-op program, as you know, John, and Jim, and Ann. So there is going to hopefully be another GIC program on higher education, and I'd like to really ask Dr. Generals to stand again, because I was going to introduce you to the audience, and certainly community colleges are a critical piece in higher education, or education at all today. So thank you for being here, and we greatly appreciate it. And I just want to thank our panel again. Fantastic conversation. Thank you for coming, making time in your busy schedules. So thank you very much. Now, as to one other thing, unrelated to the panel, but Karen Holbrook asked a question here. Karen, why don't you stand up for a second, from Florida. Karen just is a recent author who just published a book, I think 6 months ago or a year ago. Not quite sure exactly what it was, but it was on the globalization of university research and the impact of that research is having culturally, and just on how universities are structured. And Karen, thank you for offering that. Now, as to one other thing on artificial intelligence, my firm, I have been developing a bibliography, a rolling bibliography on the impact of artificial intelligence on higher education. So it now consists of about 20 or 30 entries. So if anybody wants a copy of that, I'm very happy to distribute that to you, so you can look at the materials that some of us who are really deep into this are actually looking at if you're not maintaining that kind of list yourself. So leave me your business card, and I'll be happy to email it to you. Next, an important announcement, to left. As to lunch, this side of the room, please exit to have lunch this way. This side of the room, please exit to have lunch that way. It will be very quick and efficient. I'm told by the wonderful people at the Federal Reserve Bank who do this all the time. And then my commitment to President Harker is he will begin at 1 o'clock. So he will begin at 1 o'clock. So thank you. Have a good lunch.